the one impact would maybe be equipping people with the knowledge and with the resources of understanding aviation and military aviation. So this is, on the one hand side, my videos provide this as a service, giving people information there, and then also providing that as a sort of a catalyst. Because if I think back of in my youth, if there wasn't that neighbor who had books on aircraft, who took me flying, I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Hi, I'm Jenny, CEO of Digital Voices, and I am joined for our creative podcast this fortnight with a very, very wonderful person who we've had the privilege to work with before. You might know him by the name Bismarck, but this is Chris from Military Aviation History. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Chris. On my YouTube channel, I'm known as Bismarck, and I animate the channel Military Aviation History. And basically what I do is I go and work with museums, look at aircraft, explain everybody how they work, get inside, show the outside. And then I also go to archives, do historical research on operations involving aircraft since 1914, 1916, all the way into 21st century. So that's basically it.
So at the end of the podcast, we are going to have Chris sign a camera that he has selected, a vintage camera, and he will give it away. Comment below and say your favourite thing Chris has said about his personal life or podcast.
Oh, God.
So when did you start Military Aviation History?
2016. That's when sort of the historical pitch of my channel started.
Yeah, and what motivated you to do it?
Sort of genuine interest. So I was very much into aviation, just from when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And obviously during your teenage years you develop other interests, and it wasn't exactly cool in school to be the guy who knew about, Spitfires and 109s. And other topics of discussion had to be brought to the table. So I changed my interests.
To what?
I did a lot of sports. So I did a lot, obviously football, soccer for you Americans. And then I discovered rugby, and that took a huge chunk of my life. And then I got into university, of course. And after that, I rediscovered my old passion. And that's where everything happened.
Did you keep reading about it secretly while you were being like a cool jock?
I don't think I was ever able to qualify as a cool jock, but not yes and no. So I whenever something fell into my hands, I was like, yeah, I'll read this. And obviously also in school I was very much into history. And obviously then also at university I sort of studied history. Well, not sort of studied, I studied history, and passed with a degree out of there. But the sort of rediscovering aviation as a primary focus and a topic, that came around 2015, 2016. So I've been playing with the idea for some time before that of doing something maybe with aviation related. But until I finally took that plunge and really shifted everything towards the YouTube channel, that took maybe longer than it should have. But that's what happens.
Yeah, everything takes 10 times longer than you imagine. So, okay, so you grew up in Germany and Belgium.
Sort of, yes. Alternating.
So how did you get into military aviation history? Did you have family who were involved in the military? Or?
No. So obviously coming out of a German family, there was one rule, and that was don't mention the war, which was kept quite sternly, that rule, which sort of increased my interest maybe a bit. I did want to know about the thing that I was not supposed to talk about. One thing I remember is the movie Battle of Britain came on TV once, and I really, really wanted to watch it. And I was only about allowed to watch about the first hour or something. This was when I was like 12 or 13, right? But the reason also why I was only supposed to watch 1 hour is because, there's violence and so on, and my parents didn't really feel comfortable with that being, on my peripheral. I wasn't allowed to watch Star Wars either, so there we go.
You weren't allowed to watch Star Wars?
I hope my parents don't see this. No, but the interest sort of did develop there. We had a neighbor who's a good friend of the family as well. He was a pilot, and he had flight simulators. Yeah. And so I got into flight simulators when I was already 8 or 9, and he took me flying sometimes. And yeah, that's where it developed sort of. And then, it just kept, as I said, in the background, always festering away with that idea, do something about aviation. And eventually it happened.
It's really funny that you had this illicit passion for aviation. You weren't allowed to read history books about it, or were you?
The question was always not of, you were not supposed to talk or read about it. It was just why that? And there's so much history. Why don't you read something about the Romans, or why don't you do something about the Industrial Revolution? So there was never sort of a real forbidden element in it, where really somebody took something out of my hands and you're not allowed to do this. But once you reach adulthood, you just do what you want anyway. So
I didn't realize you were such a rebel. I've seen you as quite unrebellious, but until the spray paint got in your hand, I didn't know you were a rebel. What did you grow up wanting to do then? What did your parents want you to do?
Oh, my parents were, you can do anything. Okay. Do what you want. There were no restrictions, or they were always supportive about, where I wanted to go. So when I decided to study in the UK, going up to Scotland there for my undergrad, they were supportive of that. The topic as well. So I did a joint degree in international relations and history. That was fine. Then I did another master's after that. There was never any sort of restriction of, no, you should do something that honors the family name or something like that. They were very open and supportive every step of the road. Of course, once I explained to them, this was actually a nervous thing a little bit. I mean, this was me in my mid-20s being a little bit nervous about telling my parents that my job now consists of uploading videos involving military aviation. But I explained it and they were immediately, wow. So they were actually quite surprised and supportive, really, that I had sort of built up something by myself.
How long had you been running the channel before you told them that it was your job? Did you do it secretly for a while? Or?
No, it wasn't secret. It was just that the topic never emerged to talk about. So I had different jobs. I was working in France at the time, and I did sort of the channel at the side. And then I came here to London, and then I think that was the point in time when I told them, because it was also sort of a thing of saying, look, this is what I'm doing now. But there was never sort of this element of, let's have a secret here. They're not supposed to know. It just happened that way because we didn't have that conversation.
Do you think that's partly just because you were living apart from them? Because you've lived all across Europe, which I think probably informs your understanding a little bit. You're very capable of telling stories that translate. I mean, you've worked for the RAF, you've talked about Luftwaffe, you've talked about a lot of countries' military history without annoying too many people, right, yeah. Which is a skill.
I mean, I had the fortune of going to school in an international school. So from the age of, must have been 12, I was having classes with people from the US, from the Netherlands, from France, from everywhere. And you get to know every single stereotype there is, and you become immune to insults that involve stereotypes, which is very fun. But at the same time, you also understand how different cultures or societies see the same event in a different light. And then you also learn sort of an understanding of how you can talk to them about a significant historical event that happened for their nation or in their time without sort of, offending anybody. So yeah, it did help sort of that background and then getting an understanding or sort of an appreciation of the different interpretations that exist of same events, and how you can even though there are different, the perspectives might be vastly different, that you can still find common ground.
Yeah, because one of the things I think you're really good at is explaining context and like you're very I think it's because you're such an academic sometimes.
Such an academic.
Such an academic that it makes you you put so much effort into your research that it makes you quite easy to understand, I think.
It is difficult, because the more you read, the more you understand how little you know, and the more you understand how much context there actually is, even for very mundane events. And that is a big focus when I write my scripts, of trying to condense something down to the bare essence, still keep the wider context, and make people understand why did something happen a certain way. Because if you don't have those three things, sort of, basically the context, the wider realm in which a decision was taken, and then obviously also the outcome, you're never really going to understand why something happened in the first place.
Yeah, and there's a lot of controversy, often in like historical terms as well. How do you deal with that?
Controversy, mostly it comes down to sort of popular myths. Yeah, sort of. I had a conversation with a historian recently about the Dam Buster raid, and we essentially, or what she said is that in Britain there is sort of the holy trinity of World War II memory, which is the Battle of Britain, Dunkirk, and then the Dam Buster raid. And obviously around this holy trinity there's a lot of stories, a lot of myths, and everything of that has a foundation in fact or historical fact. And what happened, but it's sort of spun from there. So once you start reading about these events, you sort of unravel how these stories came to be and why certain myths proliferated. And once you understand how they came to be, you can then understand how to tackle them. And it's not essentially done by just telling people they're stupid and believing them, but rather just expanding the context and giving them the tools then to realize and sort of get the wheels turning a little bit, even if that sounds very arrogant, of realizing, okay, there is more to the story than I previously anticipated. And this also happens to me every time I read something about a story that I think I know well, and I pick up another book about it, and I'm just like, oh, okay. And that actually then leads into that, and I hadn't considered that element yet, and now I can link it to this as well. And you sort of, you build yourself up a canvas, sort of like, I don't want to say like a detective, but you sort of start making links the more you read about very mundane historical events, and it suddenly becomes very interesting.
So how do you decide on your video topics? Because I've noticed you read all the time, and that, like, there is a huge wealth of information out there. And I can tell you're very set on myth busting. You're very set on making sure people know what actually happened, even though it's always subjective. So how do you choose?
Well, the myth busting sort of, I wouldn't say it's the primary focus, but it happens consistently due to the fact that there are so many myths out there. So if I would make a video about Pearl Harbor, automatically there's going to be things that in the popular memory or popular narrative are not going to fully gel with my video, because I'm gonna be sitting there and actually the Japanese did not have a success rate of 90% on their torpedoes. Actually, it was closer to 56, and you can read Al Zim's book on this and so on and so forth. But beyond that, how I choose my topic very much depends, on a couple of things. Obviously, it always helps if there's a big historical event coming up. So now there's obviously the 75th anniversary of D-Day, so I'm doing something on the Dakota, the C-47 Skytrain, the plane that dropped all the paratroopers. So that helps to choose a topic. And then there's also other things when I just open a book sometimes and I see, that's a topic right there. That's what I have to do. And then something I actually have on some of my Patreons can choose topics, and provided I have enough information, I'll do them. And those are sometimes very interesting ideas as well, and sort of videos where that I didn't think about myself, and I'm like, actually that's a really, really good idea. and I'm gonna research that. And and from researching that, I find out new things, which happened again recently when a video I'm sort of working on right now on an aircraft that was developed in the 1930s. And that led me to discover a whole array of tests that the U.S. Navy did on and how to incorporate aviation in their maneuvers, which then fundamentally fell flat on their face during the Second World War. It never was used, but they had continuously tested things. I'm like, that's another topic where I'm going to make a video about. So every time I start working on something, there's just this chain that gets in motion, and it's like a tree in a sense, where topic ideas just sprout out, and then I think about them, and 24 hours later, I might just discount some of them. I'm like, okay, this is not going to work, or not yet. And some of these ideas stick around, so I have another idea, which you actually know, because this is how we met, which I'm not going to reveal just yet, because I really do want to make that video.
It's interesting, because one of the things that really surprised me about you when we met was that I assumed you would be, because you're doing a PhD, you want to be an academic, potentially, you know, the world is broad and life is long, but be an academic. And it surprised me that your PhD is not in military aviation history. Yeah. It's in international relations, and very current.
It surprises me as well, to be honest. Yeah, that happened. And it's still going on.
Was it a purposeful choice to keep both interests separate?
Yeah. So obviously, like I said, I did an undergraduate, and that was a joint degree. Part of that was international relations. Then my graduate degree was also in international relations. Well, it's called international cooperation, but it was international relations, universities. And then, I sort of had this passion of sharing my interest in aviation on YouTube. But then was also, where is that going to lead me? I'm not quite sure yet. And at the same time, I was like, I really want to do something on current events, Germany, foreign policy. So I'm going to do that as well. And for me mentally, I think, and we had this chat before as well once, it's good to be busy. And it's good to have consistent deadlines and consistent things to work on. And when I work on the channel, I can dedicate that time to the channel, and then I have the other hours where I do something on the PhD, and so everything stays a little bit fresh, and that really helps me sort of have a clear focus on the issues without it becoming overwhelming, because YouTube is quite stressful, even if it sounds like a dream job, and the same thing goes for a PhD. I mean, it's not just sitting around reading books. That's a big part of it. But it's a lot of writing, and it's a lot of thinking, and sometimes there are days where you just want to throw your laptop out of the window because nothing lines up. But it's fun at the end of the day.
So I think there are lots of interesting bits here, but two main bits. One, doing a PhD, you focus on one topic basically, right? For 3 years?
Pretty much.
Whereas with YouTube, you can find this interesting tree of ideas and end up following bits and dropping them and listening to your community and then following one idea or dropping another one. Whereas you can't really do that so much with your PhD.
It's difficult. Yeah.
Do you feel like the freedom of having the opportunity to drop things on YouTube helps you think better?
It allows me to be a little bit more flexible. It allows me to play with more ideas. But at the same time, that freedom can be restricting, because at the end of the day, you have to present a product and you have to show something. With a PhD, even though I shouldn't be saying this, but if you, let's say, waste 2 or 3 weeks, it's not a big deal, because you can catch those up again. And sometimes you also have to take 2 or 3 weeks, just like anybody who's doing a job. A PhD is essentially a job as well. And sometimes you have to take a break from it. Whereas if you take a break from YouTube, 2 or 3 weeks, that can put your whole schedule for the next months, at least for me with my uploading schedule, in disarray. If you're focusing on weekly uploads and you have maybe a back catalog which you can just put on online, and if you've worked in advance, that's fine. And I have a back catalog now as well. But I wouldn't take 2 or 3 weeks break from YouTube, just because I know I'm gonna have a hard time catching up again. So drilling down the topics for a video has to be happen quite fast, has to be very focused as well. And there's sort of this creative stage where you think about all the different things you could do. But once you know you have a topic, that's where you really sort of button down the hatches and you write your script, you start animating, you start recording, and you do the job.
And your scripts, I can say this, having seen quite a few YouTube creators' scripts, I had never seen anything like yours. Your scripts are... I came from an academic background. Like, I did a master's and nearly did a PhD, and, you know, I was told off for footnoting too much. Everyone else who has seen your scripts is just really scared. Like, they love it. You put so much work in there. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't appreciate goes into your work, but it's very dense and it's very carefully considered and researched.
So my community knows this and they do value it, I think. There is a lot of footnotes, there are a lot of sources. So in the video that I did on the C-47, I went to the archive, I found files there for it. I went to, obviously, a library archive as well. I have my own books on that, and I think the reference list is it's quite long. It's quite long. And that's just on one plane. And that's literally just the development of one plane, and that's pretty clear cut. But I think that's also necessary if we talk about historical events, because the information should be clear, the information should be good, and the audience should also know where that information comes from. So I wouldn't say with history on YouTube, this is a big part of what I'm trying to push as well. And there's other YouTubers that do it as well. I'm not the first one to do this. But citing sources is, I think, something that should be done more consistently on the whole on YouTube. So in my videos, in the description box, you always find the sources. And what I'm also starting to do is in the subtitles. So when I say something, I actually note with brackets now, this is where it comes from. If it's a sort of a specific quote or something. So people know, okay, this is, this person said this and this person said that. And this is, I think, very important. It also shows, that you're open and transparent with your audience. This is where the information comes from. And if in the end of the day, if something is wrong, you can clearly address it and you can say, right, I read this in this book and I found out actually that other academics have looked at it as well. And this seems to be outdated. So let's have a discussion on it, how that happened. Is this because new files were discovered in the archives? Is this because the historiography sort of changed and started taking on board more accounts, more oral history, maybe more primary sources that certainly appeared? And you can have a fair discussion about it. But if you don't show your sources, if you sort of hide behind your YouTuber status, then I think that especially if you're doing history, you sort of, I wouldn't say a disservice, but maybe consider citing information.
Where does the passion to be truthful in terms of the way you tell historical stories come from? Do you feel like, is it because other YouTubers haven't done it in the past and it gives the platform a bad reputation? Is it because of fake news, or is it because of a kind of wider social responsibility?
I think if you work in history, and this goes back to me doing a degree there, obviously you take courses on how you approach history and how you reference and cite and how you do research. But if you work with history, I think there's a certain code maybe that you follow. And part of that is simply showing the information. So that's one part of the story. And then the other part of that is it's just natural to show where the information comes from. I think if you have a discussion with somebody on a historical event and you start engaging a very in-depth conversation and that person says something that you didn't know before, you want to know where did they get that information from, just because then you also know where you can read more. And this again gives the other impetus of saying, look, here are the sources that I used. There's a lot more in them if you are interested. So if I have this book here about the war in the Pacific from 1941 to 1945, and I used parts of this chapter in it, but this book is good, legitimately good, and it's worth the money. And if you want to read more about it, this is where you go. So it's on the one hand side, it is showing where the information comes from. On the other hand, it's it's just sharing with people the ability. The ability is maybe a bit tough, but sharing with people the means of where they can find more information, and it's sort of the resources that they can use.
And giving academics credit for their work as well.
Yes.
Do you feel like both YouTube and academia are somewhat not under-respected, but like under-credited with the service they do for society in terms of like spreading information and research?
That's a big one.
Yeah, just thought I'd drop that in there with your cup of tea.
For myself, I would say the service I provide is insignificant in the big scheme of things. I do videos about military aviation. I do videos about aircraft, their history, their design, what they did during a certain time frame, and I do videos about sort of the operations, the wider operations about it. If you want to know about those elements, then obviously you can look at my videos, or you can look at my source list, and there you find the books that you could look at. And in that sense, yeah, it is a service maybe for people that want to know more. But beyond that, I think it's also, YouTube provides sort of that opportunity for academics and academic sort of resources or products to be disseminated to a wider audience that they couldn't reach before. And this is in a sense where my channel also comes in. So I do my own primary research as well, where I go to archives and I go browse through the files just like any historian would. But I also use, like what you said, books written by other academics, and this gives then the ability to show this is what has been written. Go and find out yourself if you're interested about all the stuff that is out there, about the events that you've heard about since your youth, and might have piqued your interest at some point and might still pique your interest right now.
On that note, it's actually a really good time to talk, I think, about your audience here. So you have 136,000 subscribers. You have, how many of them are patrons on Patreon?
I looked at this number this morning, and 160, I think. Somewhere between 160 and 170.
For people who don't know, Patreon is a way where you can kind of crowdfund or give consistent revenue to creators based on either a monthly recurring donation or pledge, and you get perks in exchange, or every time they post a video, you get they get a payment, and there are again perks and extra access. So it's a really good way to build community.
And it helps a lot when you're doing history, which is something that is a little bit controversial on YouTube.
You're like, please buy my books and don't let me get demonetized.
Yeah.
And what I think is really interesting about your audience is when you read the comments, like when you did the RAF partnership, there were so many positive comments. These people love and appreciate the way you work, and they watch for a long time. Like their watch time is like well over 7 minutes, and they very much support you and appreciate the work you do. And I was thinking while you were speaking about your access to archives and how so few of these people could ever get to access those archives, and how they often tell you personal stories linked to war or linked to aviation, because I don't think they have another outlet to discuss it. And then on top of that, a lot of people, especially a lot of YouTube creators, are dyslexic. And so they end up making videos for people who couldn't necessarily read a huge amount of primary source information or wouldn't be able to, so that they can still disseminate and educate. How do you feel about your audience? And do you, like, are they a big part of you creating content and continuing the channel? I
mean, my videos are pretty long. I think I'm averaging between 15 to 25 minutes, something like that. Video that are coming out are going to be that length, and so that is essentially a episode of any kind of sitcom that you might have. So knowing that people watch through that video and watch it often to the end and appreciate sort of the work that goes into is a big part in sort of keeping the motivation going as well. And knowing obviously also that you have Patreons that give you money in exchange, of course, also for perks, but also just because they genuinely like your content. The perks are a sideshow in that respect. Does make it, a very rewarding experience. And it is fun reading through the comments. And I know a lot of YouTubers say, don't read the comments, don't read the comments. I still read my comments to the point that I can, especially on all new videos that come out. And I always say that it's part of you create you build together with your audience, you build a community. And that community lives and breathes by its own little bubble rules. Like it lives in a bubble and it has its own rules. And I also find it interesting when sort of somebody comes in and doesn't really know how my community is and how things work, and then how they realize that actually, wow, this channel is not some random constellation of historical stuff that is just thrown out at the screen, but actually there's a lot of work behind it. And some of the most rewarding comments really is just people saying, I had an interest in the same topic for a long time, yet in your video you've showed me stuff that I've never seen before. And obviously, given the wealth of resources that it takes to make some of these videos, the research that goes into it and the hours, that is sort of the really rewarding part as well. Having people come back consistently and looking at the videos, even if YouTube demonetizes them, which happens sometimes.
So it was an interesting situation when we ended up working with you on the RAF Battle of Britain piece. There was a moment where I was like, oh, we're about to work with a German to talk about how like the Battle of Britain was won. Like this is going to be interesting. Obviously you're much more than a German to me. Yeah.
How could I be more than a German?
More than a what? No, but it was really interesting because I was like, oh, is someone going to say anything? And it didn't actually come from anyone in the RAF at all. Yeah. Someone commented on the video, like, on the Starship channel, like, what would a German know about British military aviation history? And so we replied, like, well, look at Chris's channel. Like, he's a thorough researcher. He worked with a team of RAF personnel. And he's doing a PhD, he knows a hell of a lot. And then it was having your audience jump in as well. And this person immediately was like, oh, I didn't realize, thank you for letting me know. But your whole audience were like there, like immediately. And I thought it was so nice to see, because it was people who were like really supported the integrity and the academic pursuit.
Yeah, no, that is true. And I'm also happy with seeing them take their time to watch and sometimes also critique my videos. So there are, of course, as always, there are sometimes points in videos where I have to choose what kind of topics I talk about. So I have this obviously wider topic, but sometimes I have to cut things out. And at that point, sometimes the audience jumps in and says, oh, you haven't talked about this specific aspect. And at which point I say, yeah, that's true, because it didn't fit the wider frame anymore. Hopefully I can do something in the future. But it's sort of engaging with that on a genuine basis and explaining why certain things haven't made a final cut. That helps. But also then, if somebody has a diverging opinion from you and says like, look, this is interesting what you've done here and what you're saying in your video, but there's also the argument that can be made that X, Y, Z did A, B, and C. And you can look, for example, at the account by X given to Y on the 15th of November, blah, 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 for your information on that. And then, you see a comment like this where somebody takes their time to write a paragraph or even two paragraphs. Not exactly, well, it is constructive criticism in a way, and it's sort of springs or is like a catalyst toward debate. And then just engaging with that and saying, yeah, that's fine. And here's another point that I would make against that or for that or in support of that even. And here's the reasons why I haven't discussed this in this video and so forth. And when you have those comments, you like those comments, you pin those comments, I'm very happy to do that. And my audience sees it. And I've had comments of people saying like, it's good to see somebody who does history. And when there's somebody in the comments who critiques and provides evidence to support that critique and doesn't just say, oh, this is a stupid video, which happens in every channel, those kind of comments. But if there's somebody who comes with sort of a genuine desire to provide constructive criticism and also provides evidence to support it, then I'm more than happy to engage with it. And if I make a error in a video, which has happened before. It's just a matter of things. I'm very happy of making a second video and saying, I got it wrong, and just explaining why I got it wrong.
So there's value in that.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I noticed that with you. You like often interact with people in the comments, and you won't let yourself be misquoted, which I really like. If someone says, why do you say this? You'll be like, I said X, like, yes. Which is brilliant. But then also you have obviously like a lot of respect for the craft. And if someone's gone through the effort of reading history or like reading different sources and is contesting them in an educated way, you're like, yeah, this is what the channel's all about.
That is what it's all about. It is about disseminating information, broadcasting information, starting a discussion, and sharing a passion that I have with people that have a similar passion.
Do you get a chance to meet much of your audience? And are they... What type of, are they people who are passionate on the side about military aviation history? Do they work in the industry? Do they have family history? Like, what's the...
It's a mixed bag. So there's some people that have family history. Recently, I actually, one of my patrons told me, when I told everybody that I am making a video about the C-47, he said, oh, my dad flew those. And then he told me about them. And we actually discussed whether it would be possible to use some of the pictures that his dad has in the aircraft on the video itself, which I would have been happy to do. The only issue then ended up that there were a lot of pictures, but never with that specific aircraft. So that ended up not happening, but it would have been fun. Some people in the industry, a lot of people that are just genuinely interested. And yeah, you meet people from all walks of life, people that had family in the Air Force, people that had family or themselves are working in the industry. You have young people that have a passion, you have some engineers, you have some aeronautical engineers, you have everything. And meeting them, so I'm still relatively small channel, so I don't get caught on the street by suddenly somebody, oh, that's you.
Has that happened though?
No, it hasn't happened yet. And I'm fine with that as well.
It's going to happen soon.
It's going to happen at some point. It's fine. We'll see how it happens. But it does start happening at events. So I was filming it at an event recently, and a couple of people came up and said, hi, enjoy your work. Thanks very much. Bye. And it does still catch me out, and I don't know how to react. And the only thing I can say is thank you. And then I sort of stammer and incomprehensively trying to speak in a language that is not my own, trying to make a point of appreciation. It doesn't work out because it still is very weird, but I know I'm thankful for those people. And hopefully sometimes at some point I will get my stuff together and I'm actually able to hold a conversation with them.
You're you're quite a private person, and I'm quite, when I first met you, I was very impressed that you put your face in videos and that you're very kind of documentary led in that sense, very much like a TV documentary, but you still had that avatar. Yeah, high praise indeed. You still had that Bismarck avatar, and you're now transitioning away from it.
Yes.
What was the thing that made you shift?
In the one hand, it's perhaps also a transparency thing. I'm putting myself out there, putting my work out there. So, my face is already part of the program, for better or worse. Probably for worse. But yeah, that's just happened. And also, the picture that Ellie took from me is a pretty damn good picture.
Photographer on staff, she's great.
It just fit perfectly, I think. So at that point I was like, also because eventually I thought that the avatar, it was kind of fun and it's a nice piece of art, but in the end maybe I should be a little bit more brand aware, I guess. This is something I still have to learn, which I'm happy to learn, of course.
Would you go full-time YouTube?
I still have. Let's talk after I finish my PhD.
You're like, Jenny, please, I want a tenure track position.
I like being busy. You know this. And currently, the way things are working, I have my schedule for sort of my professional life, which might be PhD, but might also be my channel. I'm still not quite sure. I often ask myself, what is what is my primary project at the moment? Is it the PhD or is it my channel? And it's kind of both. And they work in a beautiful symbiosis where one leads to the other and back, and somehow it works out. But it does require a lot of time management and effort on both sides.
The final thing I wanted to ask about your channel is, what's the one impact you wanted to have?
The one impact would maybe be equipping people with the knowledge and with the resources of understanding aviation and military aviation. So this is, on the one hand side, my videos provide this as a service to society. No, but giving people information there, and then also providing that as a sort of a catalyst. Because if I think back of in my youth, if there wasn't that neighbor who had books on aircraft, who took me flying, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. At that age, I remember I was reading some books on whales, and I wanted to be a marine biologist. So that sort of kickstarted a whole new thing that I was way more passionate about in the end than marine biology. So if I can have sort of that effect on the one hand side on young people maybe, and at the same time also engaging with the wider audience, the wider aviation community, and providing hopefully a valuable contribution there. There we go. That would be nice. We'll get there maybe.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. We're going to do quickfire questions now.
Oh dear.
Whoop whoop. Your favorite YouTube channel that isn't yours?
Primitive technology. And what I do is I literally just click on that video, put it full screen, and I just relax.
Okay, your favorite cuisine?
I really like Korean. I've lived there for 2 years and I've never had a bad meal.
Phone or text?
Text.
Your favorite drink?
Sparkling water.
Your favorite advertising campaign?
So there is a campaign that was done in Germany for learning English. There was a quick sketch with a Coast Guard guy, and there's a British ship that sends out an SOS, and they say, "Yo, we're sinking," and he responds, "What are you thinking about?"
The dream brand to work with?
I mean, Bendix would be pretty cool. Then any sort of Air Force that is out there.
What's your next holiday destination?
Switzerland, most likely, but it's not holiday. It's filming and holiday.
Your favorite social network?
I'm going to call my Patreons my social network.
Least favorite?
I'm not a big Facebooker.
The worst fad on YouTube ever?
I've never really got behind the whole React thing. I understand the appeal. It never did it for me. I just don't understand it.
If you could be any animal, what would you be?
Maybe a condor. I've recently saw condors. That was pretty awesome.
Next video you're working on?
2 videos that we recently shot in the RAF museum. So there's the Albatross and the RE-8. And then there's a video coming up on the American torpedo bomber, a German jet, and gun sights.
If money were no object, what would be the dream video? And access were no object. Yeah. What would be the dream video to make?
A big, massive tour of Canada and the US, going from one aviation museum to the other.
Last question, it's pretty dark. When was the last time you cried?
2 weeks ago, I watched a movie that always makes me cry. Empire of the Sun. Have you ever seen that? Oh, you should watch it. Yeah, actually, first you read the book. I had to read the book in English school, in English language class at school, and then later on I watched the movie. And that's the one movie that always makes me cry.
That's awesome. You survived.
I survived.
Just about. Do you want to do the outro?
There's still an outro.
Thank you very much for watching the Creator Podcast with Chris, with Bismarck. He's actually going to sign and give away this camera. It's a vintage camera. It probably doesn't work, so don't get overexcited.
The mechanism still works.
The mechanism works.
So if you enjoy doing this...
Feel free to comment in the bottom about something interesting that you think he said, and we will choose a winner. Thanks for being so open and going into parts of your life you don't normally go into.
Thanks for having me.
And talking about academic stuff, which I actually quite like.
It's very different to what you might usually expect from these videos.
Yeah, I like that though, it's good. In 2 weeks we have an industry podcast, and then we'll go back to create one 2 weeks after that. But yeah, it's been an utter joy.
It has. Thank you very much.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.